Okay, have you ever wondered, like, if there's some kind of cosmic scorecard
Yeah.
keeping track of, like, all the stuff we do?
It's funny you should say that because the concept of karma, where actions have consequences that can even ripple across lifetimes, it's a really central idea in several Eastern
No,
religions.
absolutely. Like, the idea that you're basically trying to balance out this karmic debt, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately hoping to break free from that cycle of reincarnation, what they call samsara.
Yeah, samsara.
But what we're going to dive into today is how the Baha'i Faith tackles this whole cause and effect thing, but through this lens of divine justice.
I think that's what's so interesting about it. Even if someone listening isn't familiar with the Baha'i Faith, their teachings on this, it gives you a really unique perspective on like free will and accountability and what our purpose in life, even is.
Yeah, for sure. So for anyone who might need a little refresher, can we quickly recap what we mean by karma? We're talking about those traditions like Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, where every action, thought, even word, it all has consequences.
Right? Every little thing. What's that saying? What goes around comes around.
Exactly.
And those consequences, they determine your future, not just in this life, but in multiple lifetimes. And the big goal in these traditions is to reach liberation by breaking free from the cycle of death and rebirth.
Okay, so this is where I start to wonder if karma is this impersonal law, like it's spiritual physics or something.
Yeah.
Are we all just puppets in this big cosmic play?
Right.
Does it mean our past totally controls our future and there's no room for change?
It's a question that a lot of people wrestle with, for sure. And it kind of brings us to a key difference with the Baha'i Faith. The Baha'i Faith rejects that idea of reincarnation and this impersonal view of karma. Instead, they emphasize this really dynamic relationship between humanity and God. And that's where this whole idea of divine justice comes in.
Okay, so instead of just like the scorekeeper in the sky, there's something more personal involved.
Yes. The Baha'i writings describe it as this loving, guiding force that takes into account our intentions, struggles, capacity for change. It's not just a cold calculation of actions, but a real understanding of our journey.
All right, so that makes sense. But if it's not just this simple equation of action equals consequence, how does this divine justice thing actually work? I mean, does it mean there are no consequences for our actions?
Not at all. The Baha'i teachings really stress both free will and accountability. Abdu'l-Baha, a central figure of the faith, explained it this way, and I'm going to quote him here. God has given man free will, and he has also set before him good and evil. That is, light and darkness.
So we have the power to choose, but it doesn't mean we get a free pass for those choices, right? There are still consequences, but they're just assessed differently.
Exactly. Divine justice, it considers the entire picture. Our intentions, the effort we put in, even our genuine repentance, it all plays a role in how our actions are viewed. It's about understanding the subtleties of being human, you know?
Okay, so there's room to grow and change in this whole framework. It's not about being stuck with what you did in the past, but about your ability to learn and evolve.
Absolutely. And the Baha'i writings emphasize that we are not eternally bound by our past mistakes. Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i Faith, actually wrote about the ocean of God's mercy that guides creation.
So I'm starting to see how this idea of divine justice, it really shifts the focus. It's not about doing good things to even out some cosmic scale or escape reincarnation. It's about striving to be better versions of ourselves in this life and preparing our souls for the next.
You said that perfectly. And one of the core things in the Baha'i teachings, this idea of the purpose of the soul. They believe we're created to know and worship God, and that we're on this constant journey of progress that covers both like the material and spiritual realms.
But how's that different from the reincarnation cycle in those karmic traditions? Because it still sounds like we're talking about consequences going beyond this earthly life, right?
You're right to point out the connection. However, the Baha'i Faith emphasizes this eternal progression of the soul through these different spiritual realms. It's not about coming back to earth through reincarnation. In fact, Baha'u'llah wrote, "Know thou that every soul is fashioned after the nature of God, each being pure and holy at its birth."
So no baggage from past lives. That's a pretty significant difference.
Exactly. And it ties right back into the purpose of why we're here. It's about constantly moving closer to God, refining our souls, and helping to make humanity better.
Okay, so it's not just about me being saved, it's about working for a greater good too, right?
Exactly. The Baha'i teachings really stress this idea of the oneness of humanity and working together to build a more just and peaceful world.
That's a powerful concept. But if we're always trying to work towards this greater good, How do we even know which actions will get us closer to God? Is there like a rule book or something?
Well, the Baha'i teachings do provide a lot of guidance on ethical conduct, both for individuals and for society as a whole. And these teachings, they come from the divine messengers sent by God throughout history, guiding humanity towards spiritual and social progress.
So it's not just about blindly doing good deeds. There's like a framework, a deeper understanding of what it means to live a righteous life. One that aligns with this whole divine justice idea.
Precisely. The Baha'i writings offer a path, a set of principles that can help you navigate through life's complexities and make choices that reflect your understanding of God's will.
This is really making me rethink how I approach my own decisions. But before I get too deep into that, can we kind of take a step back and recap what we've learned so far? We started with this impersonal idea of karma, this system of action and consequence playing out across lifetimes. Then we compared that with the Baha'i concept of divine justice, which involves a personal relationship with God, accountability, and this constant striving for spiritual growth and improving humanity.
You got it. It's about understanding that our actions have real meaning. Not just a temporary earthly meaning, but a much bigger one.
I think we've laid down some solid groundwork here, but I feel like there's way more to explore. What are some of the other key distinctions between karma and divine justice that we can unpack?
Oh, there are some fascinating details to uncover. Like, for example, the Baha'i teachings on repentance and forgiveness. They offer a completely different view than what you see in karmic systems. We'll dive into that and more when we come back for part 2 of this deep dive.
Don't miss part 2. We'll continue to explore the big implications of divine justice. See you soon. Okay, so we really got into the nitty-gritty of karma and divine justice last time.
We did.
But one thing keeps coming back to me. If our actions have such long-lasting effects, are we always being watched?
Oh, yeah.
Is it like every good deed's a point for us and every bad thought is like a strike against us?
It's a common worry, but it's not about a God who's constantly judging and waiting for us to mess up. Think of it more like, a parent who understands our struggles but wants us to grow.
Okay, that makes more sense. But then what's the motivation to choose good if there aren't any, cosmic rewards? Is it all about following God's will, even if it means giving up what we want?
It's not about suppressing who we are or turning into robots. The Baha'i teachings value personal growth and happiness, but they also encourage us to think about how our choices affect others, too.
It's like walking a tightrope then.
Yeah.
How do we deal with situations where what we need clashes with what others need?
It's definitely a balancing act. There's no single right answer. But the Baha'i writings say we should listen to our conscience, get advice from wise people, and pray for guidance when making those tough calls.
What I'm realizing is this whole divine justice idea is way more complex than I first thought. It's not about following a strict set of rules. It's about really understanding right and wrong and making choices that show we're growing spiritually.
Exactly. The Bahá'í Faith really promotes this idea of independent investigation of truth, which means you're expected to use your own reasoning and judgment. But of course, guided by the principles of the faith to navigate through life.
Okay, all this talk about intentions and consequences makes me wonder about suffering. In a karmic system, suffering is often seen as a direct outcome of something you did before, right? Almost like you're paying off a debt. How does the Baha'i Faith view suffering?
That's a really sharp observation. The Baha'i teachings don't shy away from suffering. They acknowledge it as an essential part of being human. However, they don't see it as a punishment for past actions, but rather as a chance for growth and spiritual refinement.
Wait, so it's not about paying for mistakes, but about learning and getting stronger through those tough experiences.
Exactly. Think of refining gold. You heat it, you hammer it, put it through a lot of pressure to get rid of the impurities and make it shine. That's kind of like how challenges help us refine our souls. They make us stronger, they help us develop qualities like resilience, compassion, and empathy.
I like that analogy. But it's still hard to grasp that going through hard times is actually good for us. Don't we naturally try to avoid pain whenever we can?
Of course, it's normal to want to avoid pain, but the Baha'i teachings say these struggles can bring us closer to God in the end. They deepen our self-awareness and our purpose here.
So these difficult experiences, they aren't just random events. They're actually part of God's plan to guide us towards spiritual growth.
You could definitely see it that way. The Baha'i Faith sees God as a loving guide, not someone who punishes. The trials we go through are chances to refine ourselves and get closer to the divine.
I gotta say, that's a different way of looking at challenges, and it's kind of empowering too. But we've been talking a lot about this spiritual journey, this path toward God. What does that even look like in our everyday lives? Is it all about being super religious and looking inward?
The Bahá'í Faith encourages both personal spiritual growth and actively serving others. In fact, they believe that those two things are connected and both are key for a fulfilling life.
So it's not just about focusing on our own development, it's about doing good for others too.
Exactly. The Baha'i teachings really emphasize the oneness of humanity and working together to create a better world.
So what would that actually look like for Baha'is? Are we talking about volunteering, activism, that kind of stuff?
Baha'is are involved in all sorts of things that reflect those principles. Some promote education, especially for girls and women who often face more obstacles getting a good education. Others focus on healthcare, helping to improve things like sanitation and access to doctors and communities that need it. It's really about applying those spiritual teachings to real-world problems.
I like that. This idea of service really elevates the whole concept of divine justice. It's not just about saving ourselves or balancing some cosmic scale. It's about understanding how we're all connected and working together to build a better future for everyone.
That's a great way to put it. It's about aligning our actions with a higher purpose, knowing we're not just individuals, but part of something much bigger.
It really makes you rethink your own priorities, how you can help create a more just and compassionate world.
And that's the beauty of diving into these spiritual ideas. It's not just about learning facts, it's about changing how we see ourselves and our place in the universe.
This whole deep dive has been such an eye-opener so far.
Yeah.
We've gone from this impersonal karma idea to this journey guided by divine justice, which feels way more personal and meaningful.
It's a huge shift in perspective, for sure. And even though we've covered a lot, there's still some important stuff to unpack if we want to really understand divine justice.
All right, you've got me hooked. What else can we explore?
Well, we've talked about repentance and forgiveness, but we haven't touched on how those concepts differ in karma versus divine justice. I think that's a great place to pick up in part 3.
Can't wait for part 3, where we'll keep exploring the ins and outs of divine justice. Catch that. All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So we're wrapping up our exploration of karma versus divine justice today. And honestly, this whole conversation has really got me thinking.
I'm glad to hear that. In this last part, let's shift from the theory to the practical stuff. We'll look at how this divine justice idea plays out in everyday life for individuals and the Baha'i community as a whole.
Okay, so in the last couple parts, we talked about how divine justice is about personal growth, serving humanity, and having this relationship with a loving God. I'm curious, how does that actually translate into actions and decisions in the real world?
Right. Well, for individuals, the Baha'i teachings provide this framework for making ethical choices. It encourages us to think about how our actions affect not just ourselves, but everyone else too.
So it's not just about feeling good or dodging consequences, there's a bigger sense of responsibility at play.
Absolutely. The Baha'i writings really emphasize virtues like honesty, trustworthiness, compassion, justice. These principles are meant to guide how we interact with each other, both in our personal lives and as part of society.
But let's face it, life gets messy. We're always running into these ethical dilemmas, those gray areas where it's not so clear what the right thing to do, even IS. How do we handle those situations when there are conflicting values, or maybe our own desires get in the way?
You've hit the nail on the head there. The Bahá'í Faith doesn't give us a rigid set of rules for every single decision. Instead, it emphasizes developing our conscience, getting advice from wise people, and turning to prayer for strength and clarity.
So it's less about blindly following rules and more about reflecting and consulting with others.
Exactly. And it's an ongoing process of learning and growth. The Baha'i teachings encourage us to keep trying to deepen our understanding of these principles and use them thoughtfully when we face challenges.
Okay, so I'm starting to get how this ethical living framework works for individuals. But you mentioned that divine justice also affects the Baha'i community as a whole, right? What's that like in action?
The Baha'i community is actually very involved in a lot of social and humanitarian projects all over the world. These efforts are guided by those principles of divine justice and a strong belief in the worth of every human being.
Can you give us some examples of what that looks like in the real world?
Sure. For instance, Baha'is are involved in promoting education, especially for girls and women who often don't have the same opportunities. They also work on healthcare initiatives, trying to improve things like clean water and access to healthcare in communities that really need it.
So it's not just about personal piety or these abstract spiritual ideas. It's about putting those principles into practice, making a real difference.
You got it. It's about realizing we're all connected and working together to create a fairer and more caring world for everyone.
One of the biggest differences we've talked about is how karma and divine justice approach repentance and forgiveness. Can we dig into that a bit more? It feels like there's a completely different way of thinking there.
You're absolutely right. That's a fundamental difference. In karmic systems, the focus is often on balancing things out, working off the debt from past actions. It can feel like you're stuck in this endless loop of cause and effect.
Yeah, it's like you're always trying to even the score somehow.
Yeah.
But with divine justice, there's a more hopeful feeling to it.
Definitely. The Baha'i teachings highlight the power of repentance to change us and the incredible mercy of God. They believe that if we're truly sorry and make a real effort to change our behavior, it can completely wipe away past wrongs.
Well, we're not chained to our past mistakes. There's a chance for a true fresh start.
Exactly. The Baha'i writings describe God's forgiveness as this vast ocean of mercy, always open to those who turn to it with a sincere heart. It's a really powerful idea.
Wow, that's so different from the karmic view. It's not about carrying the burden of our past. It's about having the chance to learn and grow and move on.
Exactly. It shows the potential for transformation that we all have within us. It's not about getting stuck in the past. It's about embracing the chance to become better people.
This whole deep dive has been so enlightening.
Yeah.
We started with this impersonal system of karma and arrived at this approach of divine justice, which is so much more personal and meaningful.
It's been fascinating unraveling these concepts together. We've seen how different perspectives can shape our understanding of free will, accountability, suffering, and in the end, what our lives are all about.
And we've also seen how these ideas can be more than just personal reflections. They can guide us to take real action and create a more just and compassionate world.
Absolutely. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought. If we truly believe that our actions have lasting consequences, not just in this life, but forever, how does that change how we live each day? How would it affect our priorities and the choices we make?
That's something to really think about. It's been amazing exploring these profound ideas with you, and maybe this is just the beginning. There's always more to learn and discover. Thanks for joining us.